Today, in Real Life Archives, the two faces of Maradona.
Today, we're embarking on a really serious, profound documentary exploration of what has to be football's most polarizing, fascinating, and deeply controversial figure. We are looking at a man whose very name evokes actual religious reverence in some people and absolute unchecked outrage in others. So let's dive right into the profoundly complex story of Diego Armando Maradona.
A little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. It is perhaps the single most infamous justification in the entire history of sports, spoken with a sly smile right after a moment of blatant deception on the world's absolute biggest stage. This quote completely sets the stage for the deep dichotomy of his legacy. You really have to wonder, how does a single player embody both the divine and the deceitful so completely?
To answer that, we have to transition into our first act here. Because look, before we can judge his sins, before we can even begin to understand his transgressions, we really must first understand his absolute supremacy on the pitch. We need to establish just how untouchable Maradona was as a sports hero. He wasn't just good, right? He was, without a single doubt, the greatest player of his time. And to many, many fans, the absolute best in the history of the sport. The Houston Chronicle actually once described him as having the athleticism of Michael Jordan, the power of Babe Ruth, and the human fallibility of Mike Tyson. Think about his early days in the impoverished Via Fiorito, where he was discovered at just 8 years old. He was so incredibly talented that coaches actually demanded his ID card because they literally couldn't believe a child that small could do what he did with a football. By the time he debuted in the Argentina Primera Division at just 15, he was already El Pibe de Oro, the Golden Boy. Just listen to the sheer weight of who is speaking here. Michel Platini, undeniably one of the greatest European players of his generation, openly admitted, the things I could do with a football, he could do with an orange. That's the level we're talking about. Even the absolute most elite players of his own era viewed Maradona as this otherworldly talent. He had this impossibly low center of gravity, immense physical strength that let him just brush off brutal tackles, and a tactical brain that was virtually unmatched by anyone else alive.
So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the sheer scale of his genius. And I think it's perfectly encapsulated by this single number, 60. That is the number of meters Diego Maradona dribbled past 5 different England players. We're talking Peter Beardsley, Peter Reid, Terry Butcher, Terry Fenwick, and finally the goalkeeper, Peter Shilton. He did all of that in just 11 touches to score the 1986 goal of the century. And the craziest part? This happened merely 4 minutes after his infamous handball in the very same World Cup quarterfinal. It was just a staggering, mind-bending display of speed, balance, and vision. He literally took the ball from his own half and left an entire world-class national team grasping at shadows. Because he didn't just score beautiful goals, he dragged entire teams to glory. He captained Argentina to the 1986 World Cup victory, dominating that tournament in a way literally no single player ever has before or since, easily winning the Golden Ball. And then in club football, he arrives at Napoli for a world record fee. Now, Naples at the time was an impoverished southern Italian city, constantly being mocked by the wealthy north. Maradona single-handedly carried them to their first ever Serie A title in 1987, and then he did it again in 1990. He wasn't just a player to the people of Naples, he was a savior. He was eventually named the joint winner of the FIFA Player of the Century award alongside Pelé.
Let's wrap up this opening act by just looking at the modern era for a second. Even Lionel Messi, the contemporary gold standard of football, absolutely bows to Maradona's divine genius. He stated, "Even if I played for 1,000,000 years, I'd never come close to Maradona. He's the greatest there's ever been." His sheer mastery of the ball was and remains a totally undisputed fact of football history. Act 2. The fallible human. The cracks in the idol. You see, the divine figure we just talked about on the pitch, he was tragically, deeply human off of it. That godlike status brought with it an overwhelming, suffocating pressure. In cities like Naples, he was basically treated as public property. He couldn't even walk down the street. And seeking refuge from that completely crushing reality, he turned to really destructive habits. The very environment that worshipped him was essentially consuming him alive. His troubled off-pitch life is entirely a matter of public record, and it builds into a deeply tragic picture. It's alleged his cocaine use actually began as early as 1983 while he was playing for Barcelona. By the mid-1980s, when he was in Naples, his addiction was full-blown, and he developed these highly controversial ties with the Giuliano clan of the local Camorra crime syndicate. The absolute breaking point for his career came in 1991 when he failed a drug test, serving a massive 15-month ban from football.
He then attempted this miraculous comeback for the 1994 World Cup in the USA, only to be expelled in total disgrace after testing positive for ephedrine doping.
Which leads us to a really uncomfortable question. Was the greatest player in history also a serial cheat?
Act 3. The Serial Cheat. A History of Deception.
Because Maradona's rule-breaking wasn't merely a tragedy contained to his personal life. No, it was weaponized directly on the field of play. We absolutely must deeply question his sportsmanship and examine the undeniable history of deception that stains his legacy. The most famous instance, of course, occurred on June 22, 1986, the Hand of God. 6 minutes into the second half of that World Cup quarterfinal against England, Maradona, standing at 5 feet 5 inches, goes up to challenge the English goalkeeper Peter Shilton, who was a full 8 inches taller, for a high ball right in the penalty area. Knowing full well he couldn't win the header fairly, Maradona cunningly raises his left arm and literally punches the ball into the net. The Tunisian referee, Ali Ben Nasser, and his linesmen completely failed to spot the infringement. The goal stood. It was a deliberate, totally calculated act of cheating on the world's biggest possible stage.
And the thing is, he wouldn't apologize for it. Not for a very, very long time. In fact, he justified it. Years later, in a documentary, Maradona tied that blatant cheating directly to the Falklands War, or the Malvinas War, which had occurred just 4 years prior between Argentina and the UK. He stated, "It was a nice feeling, like some sort of symbolic revenge against the English." So he essentially framed a completely illegal sporting act as this act of patriotic retribution. He was leaning heavily into the South American concept of viveza criolla, which is this idea of a native cunning that justifies using unfair means if it achieves a successful end.
But here's the kicker. This was not a one-off instance born out of intense political tension. 4 years later, in the 1990 World Cup over in Italy, Argentina was playing the Soviet Union. A Soviet attack was heading straight for the goal, and Maradona, standing right on his own goal line, blatantly intercepts a ball with his hand to prevent the score. And once again, it went completely unpunished by the referee. So the pattern of deliberate, unrepentant cheating was very, very firmly established.
Yet, the darkest, honestly most disturbing allegation of cheating involves an incident that goes way, way beyond a spontaneous handball in the heat of the moment. It brings us to the infamous 1990 World Cup knockout match between Argentina and their absolutely fierce rivals, Brazil. An incident known forever as El Bidón de Branco, the Branco bottle trap.
Let's meticulously walk through the deeply premeditated events of this completely unsettling incident. It's a sweltering hot day in Turin. Brazil is heavily dominating the match. Suddenly, right in the 39th minute, the Argentine player Pedro Troglio goes down injured. The Argentine masseur and medic, Miguel Di Lorenzo, who went by Galindez, rushes out onto the pitch carrying several water bottles. Now pay attention here, some are transparent and some are green Gatorade bottles. As the players gather around during the stoppage, the Brazilian left-back Branco innocently asks for some water to cool down in the intense heat. He is offered one of the green bottles by the Argentine staff. The Argentine players, however, have been carefully instructed beforehand to only drink from the transparent bottles. Branco drinks the laced water. Almost immediately, he begins to feel terribly ill. He's dizzy, he's nauseous, literally stumbling his way through the rest of the match. And shortly after, completely against the run of play, Argentina scores the winning goal and eliminates Brazil. Branco's haunting recollection of that day is genuinely chilling. He stated, "Galindez, the masseur, gave me water. After I drank, I started getting dizzy." He realized exactly what had happened and tried to tell his teammates on the pitch, but he was just mocked. The Brazilian coach at the time, Sebastião Lazzaroni, later expressed absolute utter outrage. He stated that this wasn't mere gamesmanship, it was playing entirely dirty, basically asking if there was really a need to fall so unbelievably low just to win a football match.
And let's be unequivocally clear about what this means. This was not just bending the rules, right? This was not a cynical tactical foul. The substance hidden inside that water bottle was a heavy sedative. They actively poisoned a rival player mid-match to gain an unearned advantage. It represents just a staggering lack of ethics and a genuinely dangerous disregard for human safety.
For over a decade, the Argentine camp, including their coach Carlos Bilardo, either completely denied it or just remained silent. But then, in December 2004, on an Argentine television show called Mar de Fondo, Maradona brought it up himself. He chillingly confessed to the entire trap. He blatantly admitted, "Someone crushed a Rahabnal in the bottle and everything went bad." And you want to know the most disturbing part of all of this? He was laughing. He literally laughed as he described Branco taking free kicks and falling over from the dizziness.
He confessed to a severe sporting crime as if it were just some brilliantly executed practical joke among friends.
The verdict: genius or cheat?
How in the world do we reconcile these entirely conflicting truths? We are really forced to bring the two completely opposite halves of his identity together in this stark, totally unresolved clash. After that 1986 match against England, the French newspaper L'Équipe summarized him absolutely perfectly. They called him half angel, half devil. And I think that just highlights the total impossibility of ever separating his magic from his malice. They exist entirely in the exact same vessel.
And this brilliant, agonizing dichotomy forces a choice. Look, on side A, we have the divine football genius, the man who executed the goal of the century, a player who provided sheer joy to millions and literally lifted entire cities and nations on his back. And right next to it, on side B, is the unrepentant serial cheat, a man who punched a ball into a net, who laughed on national television about drugging an opponent with tranquilizers, who truly felt the rules simply did not apply to him. History forces every single one of us to grapple with how to weigh these realities against one another.
Before we wrap this up, I want to quickly break the fourth wall here. If you found this explainer as profoundly fascinating as I did while putting it together, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. But much more importantly, I really need to know your verdict on this. Head down to the comments right now and tell me what you think.
Because I want to leave you with this final, completely unresolved thought. Looking at the totality of his life, the unbelievable, sky-high heights of his pure talent, and the staggering, really dark depths of his deception, how will you define the legacy of Diego Armando Maradona? Was he a flawed, divine genius, or was he just an unrepentant cheat?
This is just one story. There are many more you wouldn't believe. Subscribe for the next one.